Prepare to be captivated by the business story of the week, hosted by me, Shaheen Shan. Join us on a journey through the twists and turns of entrepreneurial triumphs and setbacks. Immerse yourself in the narrative and witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. This is Business Story of the Week.
And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua, and today we are going to do things a little bit differently. We are doing a series on Hypernomics, and today we are joined once again, by the father of Hypernomics, a discoverer of Hypernomics himself, Doug Howarth. No need for introduction right now because we are going to jump right into it. We're going to introduce you guys concepts today that will help you grasp a little bit more into this new field. Like, it's so new, we don't even have a Wikipedia page yet. Right, Doug? How are you doing?
That's right, yeah. It's kind of considered poor form to put up your own Wikipedia page, so I'm going to wait till somebody else does it, and then I can help rewrite it. But yeah, we don't have one yet, so no.
Not
Soon,
yet, because that's why it's such a new field right now. We're still talking about it. You have a book out on it, and we were talking about this prior to the call, to the recording. Father of Hypernomics, but you said it's more appropriate to call it a discovery because this existed before us. Before we start getting into the concepts of this today, of this series, Doug, talk to us about what is Hypernomics, why is it so new, and what's the importance and implications of this today, and why don't we have a Wikipedia page yet?
Well, I'm trying to answer all those questions in some kind of order here, Joshua, but Hypernomics is a study of hyper meaning more than three dimensions, and nomics from nonomy, meaning a field of study. So Hypernomics is a field of study in 4 or more dimensions. Now, that initially might sound kind of complicated, but it takes things that you already know and then just puts them together in a way you haven't seen, but it turns out to be important.
Right.
So, for example, you know that if you were to buy a car, you pay more for added horsepower and you pay more for miles per gallon, but you also know that Ferraris cost more than Sentras, and you know that the fewer Ferraris are sold rather than Sentras. So right there, you already know 4 dimensions. You know that there's a quantity dimension,
right,
for the Sentras and the Ferraris. You know there's a price dimension to that. And on the other side of that, you know that there's a horsepower dimension and a miles per gallon dimension. So you already know all this stuff intrinsically. What this does is it collects it all together, and it realizes, importantly, that people self-aggregate their behaviors in ways in which we can predict what they're going to do based on what they've done. And so that's the real key to this, is that people collectively see things the same way, which is to say they don't see things identically the same way. It's like, we haven't, as a group of humans, decided that everybody's going to be 5'7", but we have decided that most of them, unless you're, exceptionally small or exceptionally tall, most adult humans are between 4'5" and say 7 feet. We don't see 13-foot people. We don't see people that are 1 foot tall. And so the humanity has kind of agreed on what the range is for size, height.
Right.
Well, in the same way, they've agreed what the value of products are too, and that turns out to be massively important. That's what Hypernomics is about.
I remember you used like the washing machine analogy as well, and it's the same analogy similarly to what you use with Ferraris right now, which is basically, I love how you said it's like self-aggregated. We've decided that this is, the inherent value of it, but we don't really know why, right? Like, we don't really know like how it all came together. But what Hypernomics does is it puts it in sort of like a 3D, 4D plane for us, basically.
4D system, yes. And it doesn't ask so much the how as the what and the what. And it asks what are people doing, rather than how did they get there. We don't know how they got there. We think it's probably communication between people, as we'll discover as we go through this, that there's communication in all kinds of realms, and that's kind of what helps drive this, we think, is the communication between people. So, for
Precisely. And
example, nobody's going to pay
okay.
$20 million for a brand new
Hmm.
Ferrari because
Hmm.
it's not that rare. People pay $1 million for it because we've agreed that it's worth that. Similarly, nobody's going to sell a Ferrari for
Hmm.
$1,000 when it just came off the assembly line. So people have agreed that there's a price for that Ferrari based on what its features are. Its body style, which is very unique, its horsepower, and its miles per gallon, and everything else that goes with it.
And Hypernomics helps us plot that together and make sense of why
Yes.
we agreed
Mm-hmm.
and why we came up to that conclusion. Um,
Right. So, for example, do we have time for the electric car
Go ahead.
market
Of
here?
course. Please,
Yeah.
please,
The
please.
electric car market, for example, in 2013,
Hmm.
on this side of this device, this is a four-dimensional system. So this is a dimension here. This is quantity, and
Hmm.
this is price. So quantity, price, we have a two-dimensional system here. Each one of these dots depicts the quantity sold in this direction and price in that direction for all the cars that were in the market at that time. So these were a pair of Teslas up here,
Hmm.
and this was the Nissan Leaf down here.
Yep.
And what's important about this is there's a limit to the market right here. This is an outer limit of the market. And you also notice, as we're going to see in a little bit, that there's a gap in the market right here. Nobody was playing
Right.
in this for that price
Hmm.
range. And then
Hmm.
just as we talked about how the gas-powered cars wanted horsepower and miles per gallon, well, it turns out in
Right.
electric cars, people want, in this direction, they want to have more range. You want to be
Yes.
stuck. So what happens here is as you add range, the value of the car goes up. And then
Uh
as
huh.
you go in this direction,
Hmm.
as you add horsepower, the value of the car goes up. This takes
Hmm.
four things you already knew and just pushes them together. So every point here has a matching point here. And that's
Right. Of
the
course.
that's the interesting revelation here is that there's a demand component on this side
Hmm.
and what we call a value component on this side.
Hmm.
And that it exists in every market that we've seen outside of just raw commodities. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the way the world works right here.
Right there.
Since the
Hmm.
beginning of time, or since the beginning of humanity. We're going to talk about that in a little bit here, but at least since the beginning of humanity. Maybe before that, we don't know. So
I love
actually,
how
we
you
do know.
put that.
We'll get into it.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly, right?
right.
I love how you put that. That is how the world works. Ladies and gentlemen, audience and listeners, this isn't just about cars or washing machines. It's about like how the world works somehow, and
Yes,
we're
right.
starting to figure out. And Doug has come up with this, or like has discovered this system to kind of put it together and plot it together, make sense of it.
Hmm.
But Doug, you said that this has existed before. Before we jump into these other concepts, this has existed before. We're only we're only starting to make sense of it now, and
Right,
that's why
right.
you are a discoverer more than the
Yeah.
father of hypernomics. Talk to us about that.
Well, discovery is something like Leibniz and Newton discovered calculus about the same time. Most people think that Newton discovered it. He put out a little bit of work on it and it wasn't well received, so he kind of held it for a while. And Leibniz in Germany caught up. But calculus, the relationships of these forces and times and the instantaneous changes of things,
Hmm.
the methods to describe that were invented by Leibniz and Newton, but the actual math,
Right.
this is one of the debates in math, is math discovered or invented? I would argue that it's discovered. It's especially true, I believe, for hypernomics, as we're going to see here.
Hmm.
Other creatures have used hypernomics since before mankind. So we're going to get into
Yeah,
that in a couple of sections here. But
for sure.
so this is trying to describe what, in our case, people do based on observing their behavior. And that's kind of key to the whole point.
All right. Fantastic. We are going to get into this right now. And first off, we have what we call the first concept that we call is a restaurant math. I mean, it said you forget about ordering off the menu. First, you must get a seat, but that's not a given anymore. And I believe that this concept was mostly um, observed, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're going to share the screen right now. You can walk us through this, Doug. This is
Sure.
called the restaurant math, and allow us to explain to us and share to us why this particular concept showcases hypernomics.
Sure. So just down the street here in our home, in my hometown, I'm in Santa Clarita, California, ladies and gentlemen, just about
Hmm.
25 miles north of Los Angeles.
Hmm.
When COVID hit in early 2020, a lot of people, people like my wife and myself, we wanted to go out and get a nice meal. And
Yes.
it turned out here in California that you could eat at a restaurant, but it had to be outside.
Right.
And
Right.
so the restaurant that we like to go to on a Friday night had a capacity for roughly 100 people or more inside,
Right.
but outside there was a different story. So on the this diagram that you see here on the
Right here.
yeah here as you see at the left, what they did was they had several tables for four,
Hmm.
two tables for four, and four tables of
Right here.
six,
Hmm.
and no tables for two. And
Not at
it
all.
works out because I'd actually studied this later, but it turns out that there's more than twice as many parties of two going to restaurants in the United
Oh
States,
wow. Okay.
twice as many parties of two as there are parties of four. And then there's even fewer still of six. So the chance of getting six is less than 13%. And so,
Wow.
so I knew this by observation that they had their seating wrong. So I went into the restaurant manager when we were stuck way out the line trying to get in. We finally got in.
Hmm.
And I said, "Hey, Kayla, would you like to make more money?" She said, "Well, sure,
Hmm.
Doug. I'd love to make more money. What do I need to do?" He said, "You need to swap out some of your tables for six." And you see, she kept the sixes, which I wouldn't have done, but
Hmm.
she got rid of two of the tables for four, and she put in
Hmm.
tables of two
Right here.
in B, and
It
then
is.
eventually in C, she put out some more tables.
Hmm.
And what happened was when she went from A to B, her revenue shot up 25%. And the reason
Wow.
for that is that there's simply more parties of two than there are parties of four. So this is hypernomics at its most simple level. It's trying to figure out the shape of demand. And so
Right.
the owner of the company, we know him too, he had guessed that they needed to have many more large seats. But it turns out he needed to have he needed to have smaller tables to get more
Right.
people to flow through the restaurant. And ended up he made money doing that. Across
It's really
town, there was
so.
another outfit that
Mhm.
had
Go
it
ahead.
had picnic tables. It came the
Oh,
time
they
one
did.
time we were that we were trying to get into a restaurant, and there were four parties waiting to get in, and we're all parties of two, three, and four. But his this guy's policy was that he only let parties of five or more use the picnic tables. So he had all these. He had three open picnic tables, but he had
Hmm.
people going out the door. Four open picnic tables. He had people going out the door in groups of two, three, and four that he wouldn't let in. Well, the chance of him
Right.
getting
Right.
four parties of five or more turns out to be less than seven in 10. One chance, seven chances out of 10,000. In fact, you'd be
Wow.
better off trying to hit one number on the roulette wheel twice in a row than to do that. So
Wow. That's so
it
interesting.
turns out that there's some real basic math that you can do here at the restaurant level that once you see it, you can make your business run more effectively. And that's kind of what this is trying to do: is make business and governments and militaries all run more effectively by using the resources that
That
they
is.
have, and not guessing that they have different resources than they might imagine. He's trying to
Mhm.
make sure that people see what's going on rather than what they hope is going on. It's the difference between guessing and knowing. We want to make sure that we know going in. Now, could you have an anomaly where, in the case of that one restaurant owner, that four parties of six come in? Sure, occasionally that happens. That's what the seven chances out of 10,000 means. But you don't want to bank on that. You want to bank on the best odds that you have day to day in your business, doing your business, observing the laws that
Mhm.
regulate your business, which are hypernomics. So that's what
Very,
we do.
very interesting, Doug. And
Yeah.
that, like you said, like what one of the more basic concepts of hypernomics and understanding how we behave, but more importantly, is like you said, acting based on what is, what the results and not what we hope it to be, right? Because
Right.
six
Exactly.
tables, we want to fill up those six tables, so I'm just going to put six tables here, but less than
Right.
13% of tables of six. No, it's not.
13%. 13%. Less than 13% are five or
Less than,
more, actually. Yeah,
wow. Well,
13% are parties of five or more in the United States. So,
very interesting, very, very
yeah.
interesting stuff. But we're going to move on to like a more complex version of that. We're going to talk about ants, right? Why are we going to
That's
talk
right. It
about
is more
ants? But
complex.
we are going to go into, like, again, like you mentioned this earlier, Doug, in the sense that nature already knew this before we started making sense of this. And this is a
Right.
great example of that. This is called the ants airbus ants airbus and avoidance. So when you oh, hold on while I pull up the visuals
Sure.
here. um we are talking about ants and why does hypernomics apply to ants. Hold on, pulling up the,
Well, as you're pulling it up, I'll start the story. And it'll come up here in a little
please,
bit. But
please.
um, Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist that basically enhanced our study of quantum mechanics,
Hmm.
for giggles, he just would randomly study ants. And so I
Hmm.
found myself a few months ago at the end of a trail run. I got off the dirty trail and went up on the asphalt where my car was parked. And I started to notice, I just decided I was going to look at an ant. Now, your picture hasn't come up yet. Can you get the picture to come up here?
Yes,
Let's
hold
see
on.
here. I want to,
You started seeing ants after your run, and this is quite the
yeah,
visual,
so,
really.
oh, here we go. So there in A, I decided to watch this one little reddish black ant. Must have been about a quarter inch long, little red
Hmm.
black
Hmm.
ant. And so I saw him, and he started to go in a counterclockwise circular fashion. He was tracing
Hmm.
out this it looked like a circle, but after he got around one revolution, I saw that he was out a little bit further than where he started, and then he did another revolution, and he's doing in fits and starts, and he was out further still, and then he did a third revolution. I realized in his fits and starts that what he was doing, he was pausing on the high little pebbles in the asphalt, and he was looking
Right.
around. This
Hmm.
little ant was doing reconnaissance, and so I raced home, typed in ant reconnaissance into a Google search bar, and sure enough, these ants, they're called rock ants. That's their general name. They have a,
Rocket.
a Latin name, of
Hmm.
course. But these ants that have been around 140 to 180 million years
Wow.
do what they go out and research new locations. They want to have new, clean, hygienic rock spaces. They're called rock ants for the reason. They want
Right.
rocks that
Right.
are clean, dry, close to water, close to food, but very
Hmm.
importantly, the avoidance part, they don't want to be right next to a competing colony. They want to have their own little space in the world.
Right. Right.
The ants actually look for, they try to avoid other locations. Kind of like you can imagine if you were to open up, well, here in the United States, Starbucks are really popular,
Yes.
and you
Precisely. Uh huh.
sometimes
Uh huh.
if you're in Seattle where people drink coffee all the time, you can maybe open up Starbucks against, right next to a Starbucks. But most towns you want to spread the Starbucks around so you don't have another competing Starbucks called a colony right next to
Of
you.
course.
Well, the ants are the same way. They want to have a little bit of separation.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so it turns out on the right side of this diagram here, it turns out that if you look at airliners and business jets,
Right.
they're in B, that there were, so if you plot the cabin size, which is, again, much like a house, these cabins for the small business jets can be just a few hundred cubic feet. And for the big ones, they're in the tens of thousands of cubic feet. It
Yes.
turns out
Hmm.
that the there's three big gaps there that were in the market prior
Right
to,
here. Hmm.
yeah, right there, that were in the market prior to 2020. And then down in C, what happened was Airbus recognized one of the gaps in the market, and they came
Uh
up
huh.
with a plane that was designed to, that new Airbus A220-100 fit into this gap. And because
Wow.
nobody's right in that space, there is nobody quite just a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller.
Hmm.
In fact, you can see there's another, there's only one plane that's in between the next gap. So they've got this pretty wide open space, and they had hundreds of orders as they launched because they
Right.
had
Right.
found the open space in the market. So part of what Hypernomics does is it finds the limits of markets and how people respond, but it also finds the open spaces. And so here's a case in which the Airbus company, much like that little
Mhm.
colony of ants, went out and found
Mhm.
its own little place in the sun, in this case, a big place in
Wow.
the market, where nobody else resided. And it turned out to work out spectacularly well for them. They're really doing well with this plane.
That is very interesting. And it's more like we going from, you know, small ants to the ground up to the big giant planes in the sky making us fly, and
Right,
all of that applies hypernomics. It applies to
right.
all of them.
It
Fantastic.
applies to
It's
everything.
it's
Right.
it's like it really is like deciphering the language of how the world works in any context, really, right?
Yes,
We're talking
exactly.
we're
And
talking
so to
uh,
carry that just a little bit further, so the ants are basically doing recon from 140 million years ago.
mhm,
So I maintain when humanity evolved,
mhm,
the first person in the tribe that's going down the trail or making a trail,
mhm.
he's doing recon for the group. Is there a lion ahead of me? This all we all originated, near Tanzania, modern day
Yeah,
Tanzania. Is there a lion around the corner, a snake, a viper, a rhino?
precisely.
The guy that's running point is creating part of the gross domestic product for his
Uh-huh.
tribe back several 100,000 years or millions of years ago. That person is creating product. The product being the intelligence about where to go,
Yes,
just as the ants did over 100 million years ago. They still do.
100 million years ago, and still
Yeah,
doing it today. And
still doing
only
it.
100 million years later do we start making sense of it, and we realize that we are just like ants, aren't we, Doug?
Actually, yes, right. And the ants communicate. We're not sure how the ants communicate back and forth, but
Mhm.
I mean, they're researching it. They can tell you what they do, but they haven't been able, I don't think, to explain exactly how they get
Mhm.
the information back from one individual to the another individual back to the colony. So it's pretty
Precisely.
fascinating. My knowledge of entomology is pretty limited, but I think it's a fascinating field. But it directly applies to what we're doing here as humans. So that's pretty interesting.
That's true. Very much like ants, but very much also comes down to communication. You talked
Yes,
about this at
right,
the very beginning. It's like we are trying to make sense of how we're communicating all of these values and how they come together. We're
sure.
about to graduate into the third concept of hypernomics onto here, and this is something that is called Moneyball. Of course, who doesn't love Moneyball, right? Who doesn't
Right.
love that movie? One of my favorite movies on here, and it talks about, of course, this particular concept, Moneyball, as applied in the context of the Super Bowl. Talk
And
to
the
us about
NFL,
this one.
the NFL,
The
and
NFL.
specifically
The
this is for
NFL.
NFL wide receivers. So if you can scroll down a little bit more,
Right.
um, thank you. Interestingly, people in the United States might remember a football player named Rocky Bleier in 1968. He
Right.
led Notre Dame Fighting Irish to the national title. He got
Hmm.
drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. He played for about a year. Then he got
Right.
drafted and he volunteered to go to Vietnam and he had part of his foot blown off.
Hmm. Hmm.
So he did some rehab and he came back to the Steelers 30 some pounds underweight and he kind of knocked around for a couple of seasons and you know the owner loved him. He kept him on. He probably wasn't as good as we certainly wasn't as good as he used to be and probably just barely marginal for an NFL player. And
Right.
then after a period of time, Rocky decided I'm going to put it all on the table. I'm going to get myself in the best shape possible. So he worked out. He put on 30 pounds of weight, and very importantly, he took
Hmm.
his 40-yard dash time, which is important for running backs, and as we're going to see here, receivers. He took his
Hmm.
40-yard dash time from 4.8 seconds to 4.6 seconds.
Huh.
Well,
Interesting.
I got to thinking, well, what would happen in the NFL once you get out in the NFL again? There's this rule you're on a rookie contract for I think 4 years. So what I
Right.
decided to do is to look at wide receivers that have been in the game for at least 4 years, and I wanted to take a look at the difference in receptions per game. So you see the top upper right there in A. Of course, if you make more receptions per game,
Yep.
you get more money. But as you age, interestingly, see if you start at 26,
Right.
you're going to make roughly double what you're going to make when you hit 34. And so
Really?
I think we knew that intuitively, but this shows you mathematically this is
Yes.
actually statistically significant.
Mm-hmm.
And so then over in B down in the lower left-hand corner, it shows it's a different way of looking at it from age, say, 27 to age 32.
Mm-hmm.
If you're 27 and you can get up to, say, 8 receptions a game, you're going to be close to $18 million. But if you're 32, you're going to be about, again, half of that.
Very
But the
interesting.
part I like is part C. Part C is saying, well, what happens if you improve your 40-yard dash time? So it turns out in this year, I think this was 2019 that we studied this, that the fastest receiver, this is before Tyreek Hill was in town. So Tyreek Hill can run, I think, a 4.29 or a 4.31 40. But so what we had here is it turns out there was a few people that could run about a 4.25 40, and there was a few people that were up around 4.65.
Right.
And it turns out that if you could get your 40-yard dash time from 4.65 down to 4.6, a 20th of a second, 1/20th of a second, all other things being equal, you would add $640,000 to your salary.
Wow.
So, and if you can go from 4.3 to 4.35 to 4.3, you get more than double that. You get 1.29 million. And so this is a finding that's, I mean, if I were a college athlete, I were a wide receiver, I would get myself, it would pay enormously if I had a speed coach that could get me down just a tick. Just a tick faster makes a big difference. And so this is showing you how the NFL is valuing the features of the running backs. They don't like them, the wide receivers. They don't like when they age.
Wide receivers.
But they like receptions because that's what they're getting paid to do. And they like it when they're fast because they have a chance to, break away and make a touchdown or a bigger play. And so this is something that it's basically in Moneyball, for those that didn't see it, Moneyball was saying that the chief architect of this was saying that you don't want to buy players. He was arguing that this would be the Joshua Hill's character was arguing to the Brad Pitt character. You don't want to buy players. You want to buy wins. In order to buy wins, you got to get runs. In order to get runs, you have to get on base. Now, this is simpler here. If we're talking to the wide receiver, we're not talking about the actual team here. What we're saying to the team is that if you want to make money, you got to be young. Well, you can't stop the aging process.
Of course.
If you want to get more money, you got to make more receptions. We already knew that.
Yep.
But if you want to make more money coming in, if you can get just a little bit faster, there's a lot of money in it for you. And I think everybody knew that intuitively. It just gets back to in things that you know intuitively. Now we've quantified it, and now we can put a stamp on it and say, hey, look, you get that much faster, you should get this much more money.
Precisely. And it's not just, it's just like you said, we knew it intuitively. You knew it by eye test, just by looking at it. Of course, the older you get, the slower you get. But then, people will be like, no, I'm I can still do it at this age. I can still do it. But this one actually puts it into numbers where it's like, nope, this is it. This is the actual quantifiable, measurable result that at a certain age you will only say be limited to a certain level of salary of or what money you're going to be making. Very interesting concept on here, Doug, and it just really allowed us to simplify hypernomics even better. Is there a concept that you applied in basketball, though? I'm very interested now.
No, I haven't applied it to basketball, but that's an interesting question. Like the related component to 40-yard dash time in basketball would be the vertical jump.
It is the vertical jump.
I bet you if you went to look at vertical jump, other things being equal, if you got a vertical jump of 40, some of these guys that hit 48 inches, if you had
Yeah.
a vertical jump of 48 inches compared to somebody that's at 30,
Uh-huh.
and everything else is equal, you probably make more money. But we haven't quantified that. But that is an interesting and excellent question. So that would be worth some time to study that. So yeah.
For sure. And then maybe scoring, shooting wise, and all that.
Oh yeah,
Maybe we can
sure.
come back for another series of that. Doug, talk,
Yeah.
talk to us about that, and if we ever get to studying that. But Doug, this has been very, very, very educational for me. I have so much clarity provided on here. I want to recall you talking about um, dot plots, right? And this is
Yes.
what I remembered. We talked about the dot plots on the first episode, where where back in the in I think that was England, but they were experiencing sickness, right? They were all experiencing this
Oh
type
yeah.
of
Right.
flu, and then they dotted where they were people were getting sick, and they found that there was a cesspool that was leaking. Talk to us a little bit about that. Refresh us.
Yeah. That's interesting. There was a Dr. John Snow
Hmm.
in 19th century England who's living there now. He was famously he also invented or is credited with inventing anesthesia. He actually put Queen Victoria under so she could give her birth and not have pain. So in addition to that, this very clever gentleman there was a cholera outbreak in the Soho district of London, which is just east of Mayfair, and
Right.
just a couple of districts away from Hyde Park to the east. And so he decided he wanted to figure out what was causing this, and so he started to plot the deaths
Hmm.
where people were dying, and he found that more frequently they came around what was known as the Broad Street pump.
Yeah. The
And so the
converge.
people there didn't have, back in the 1800s, they didn't have fresh water to every house. You had to go to a well and pump it. Well, it turned
Hmm.
out that this well was
Hmm.
built underneath what had been a cesspool just
Hmm.
decades earlier, or a decade or two
Hmm.
earlier, and somebody forgotten about it, put a well right underneath the cesspool. The cesspool leaked into the water, and people got sick. And so we
Yes.
figured this out.
Uh-huh.
The epidemic was already starting to slow, but then it slowed dramatically when you had to shut the well off. This was the foundation of epidemiology,
Wow.
these simple dot plots. And so what I like to talk about in my book, Hypernomics, is that hypernomics actually can walk its way back to Hansel and Gretel. When Hansel and Gretel get pulled out into the woods by their non-caring parents, left there to die, even though, why they wanted to go home, anybody's guess, but they decided to go home. And the reason they were able to go home is they
Hmm.
dropped these little pebbles in the ground as
Yes.
they went up the
Precisely.
trail. And then as they came back, they could actually find them. And so
Hmm.
that is a dot plot that created a map for them. And what a dot
Precisely.
plot is in something like this, where I'm showing the car, each
Yeah.
one of these dots
Takes us back.
represents a model in the market. And
Hmm.
so all we're doing is compressing the data down to a series of dots, paired dots, the
Hmm.
demand dot
Hmm.
and the value dot,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then seeing the relationships that form out of those, and then
Hmm.
making sense of those relationships so that we can make better business decisions as we go forward. So people say, well, Doug, it sounds extremely complicated. I tell them, hey, in fact, if I told you the plot summary of the whole book is dot plots. They could
Dot
just
plot.
say dot plots, drop the mic, and be gone, right? Well, I did a
Done.
little more work than that, but that's what this does. Is it just basically says that, if you do plot all this data, it does self-aggregate. It aggregates in a way that you can use it in every business arena in which you find yourself. So
Fantastic.
that's what this is.
From the discovery of epidemiology to
Epidemiology.
to the fantasy books to children's
Yeah.
stories of Hansel and Gretel. We find hypernomics everywhere. And Doug, that is because you've discovered it for us. You've had brought this concept to us today. And I am very glad that we've done this series, we've done the second episode on here. Doug, thank you for coming on here today. Thank you for just providing this so much clarity. I had so much fun on this episode. I hope
Me too.
audience and listeners did felt the same. Again, like we can do a series on this if you want. Let us know down in the comments and links below any questions that you might want out there. Doug, take us home. That is a great way to kind of wrap us up with the dot plots and everything, and wrapping up with that model and all the concept that we covered. Take us home. Anything you'd like to say to our audience and listeners.
Well, yeah, if you want to learn more about this from me and my company, I have a book out now called Hypernomics: Using Hidden Dimensions to Solve Unseen Problems. You can find that on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or the Wiley sites, or also on the company site, which is www.hypernomics.com. hypernomics.com. And you can drop us a line there at info@hypernomics.com, and we'll give you an answer, any questions you might have.
Fantastic. And this has been great. To our audience and listeners out there, definitely check out the book. I would love to get myself a copy as well. And I would love to have you back on, Doug, if we do find another concept to talk about.
I hope
why
so.
not?
Yeah. All right,
For
great.
sure.
Thanks.
To all our audience and listeners out there, thank you for coming on. Doug, thank you for coming on. And
Thanks for having me.
see you on the next one.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.